And welcome to another Relate Well Live with Dr. Rick Marks, which is me. It's good to see you. I'm glad that you have taken time to just join in for however long you want to join in. Stick with this as long as you want. We're around 30 to 45 minutes, and we're doing these 4 nights a week, and we're building to a Relate Well launch we're going to do on July 29th. Now, for those that have followed me for a little while, you know that my family and I got COVID. My wife, myself, my son, my daughter-in-law, we all had it at the same time, and we're down for about a month. Praise the Lord, we never had to go to the hospital or be admitted, but it was pretty bad. That right there, that cough, is some of my COVID residue. All right. So I'm saying this each night until I get past this cough. Please forgive and overlook the cough. I can't control it. It is some of the residue. And I've got some water here to drink. So anyways, so if you'll overlook the cough and hang with me, we'll get through the material for sure. All right. So I am Dr. Rick Marks and the head of Relate Well. And it is wonderful to be here with you. And I do hope that you find these Relate Well lives we're doing each evening beneficial to your life personally and also relationally. I mean, they actually help you professionally because many of the principles we talk about, though we're making applications to marriage, let's be honest, the principles apply to life and to any relationship that you enter into. So let's get started. Tonight, we're going to talk about the do's and the don'ts to save your marriage. You know, all marriages go through rough times. Now, I've been married 37 years to my first wife, Luella. We both grew up in broken homes where there were addictions and abuse and craziness, all right? And so in our childhood, we never saw a healthy marriage model. We didn't know what it was, right? It didn't exist for us. And so when we met and married in our early 20s, we loved each other, but let's be honest, we didn't know what a good marriage was. We'd never seen it. We'd never seen it. We didn't know. And you only know to do what you know to do. You're only bring what it knows, but it doesn't know what it doesn't know, right? And so we didn't really have the skills or tools to create a healthy relationship. And everybody don't have conflict in your marriage. That's a part of life. What matters is not that you have conflict in your marriage. What matters is how you handle the conflict. It's what you do with it, right? There's some research that says that suggests that adultery doesn't kill the marriage. What kills the marriage is how they handle the adultery. I think there's some truth in that. That's not to say that adultery isn't bad, because let's not take away from the major betrayal that it is, right? And let's not take away from that. But again, there are many, many, many marriages, all right, that have been saved even from adultery, but it's how they handle the crisis. You know, if you don't deal with conflict well, then long term, you become very disillusioned about each other. You become disillusioned about the relationship. You become disillusioned about whether you love this person or not, right? Whether you feel love or don't feel love, or I love him or her, but I'm not in love with him or her. Those are all the things that take place. That's normal. That's normal. The worst 2 years of my marriage were probably 2004, 2005, into 2006. All right. And I say the worst 2 years because I had a lot of things I needed to work through myself, but our usness had a lot of things to work through that have been building over time. All right. Divorce was never going to be on the table for me. When I got married to her, it literally was till death do us part. I loved her, still do. She's my best friend in the world, still is. And I wasn't willing to sacrifice our usness. Got it? But I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a lot of health. And so in the early years of marriage, so the first 9 years of marriage, I set out to learn the best practices and got teachers and mentors. I studied and I created what my brother called Mark's University. Rather than listen to music in my car, I was listening to personal development tapes and tapes on how to grow spiritually strong and tapes on personal development and relationship development. And I started applying those things to my life, you see, and making me a better me. But sometimes in our attempts to make things better, we actually make things worse. We do certain things or we don't do certain things. And by doing certain things or not doing certain things, we're not actually helping the relationship get better. We're actually inadvertently making it worse. And so a lot of couples, when they're struggling, they're trying to do what they know to do to save the marriage. What they don't know is what they're doing, though their motive is actually not a bad thing. Their motive is to save something. They're actually creating more pain and hurt for their partner and for the sense of usness. Fortunately, during that 2.5-year period when Luell and I were really disconnected, we still loved each other. We didn't feel the love much. But one thing for sure, to the best of my ability, I tried to live by the principles that I've been teaching all along. In other words, I've always tried to be a person to the best of my ability, not perfectly, hopefully maturely though. I've tried to be a person who lived by goodwill, respect, humility, and empathy. That in all of my interactions with Luella, my kids, or anyone, am I treating you goodwill? Am I being respectful? Am I caring? That's empathy. Do I have empathy for how you think and feel? Do I care? And lastly, you can't do that without humility. And if I live my life by goodwill, respect, humility, and empathy, at least I'm not causing us harm. I now call those 4 things the 4 protectors of an us. That if I choose to live my life by the 4 protectors, goodwill, respect, humility, and empathy, then at least, forgive me, that if I choose to live my life by the 4 protectors, then at least I'm not harming the relationship more. You see, that's a better way to live life. I may not know what to do different, but at least if I did those 4 things, I'm not creating more problems. So now we want to talk about the do's and don'ts to save your marriage. All right. I kind of wrote here that we all want to save our marriage at some point. And when the distance seems too great and the hurt and pain is overwhelming, a lot of times because we don't know what to do, or the pain's so great, or the fear is so bad, or the anger is so bad, we get triggered in this lower order brain, the animal brain, the reptilian brain, the brainstem, or the amygdala, and we're handling conflict from a fight, flight, or freeze response. Fight, flight, or freeze. And whenever we try and solve a problem from fight, flight, or freeze, that was my son trying to come in from the side door. So I'm in my office in the house. Whenever we try and solve problems from fight, flight, or freeze, we don't actually create a more loving environment. We create more pain, more hurt, more angst, those kinds of things, okay? And so we don't want to solve problems from that lower order brain. We need to solve problems from the higher order brain. You know, when I got married till death do us part. Now I'm in it. I grew up with a belief, because of my experience in the world, loyalty and commitment is not a value anymore in our country. People are committed to themselves first and foremost. And because people are committed to themselves first and foremost, the idea of till death do us part doesn't really exist anymore. We say it, but really it's more like till death do us part, and or when I'm no longer fulfilled, or you're not meeting my needs, or I just need to find something better. I told Luell when we first got married, jokingly, but I meant it, if you ever leave me, I'm going with you. I don't want that for my life. I don't want to live that way. Separated, divorced, disconnected. I didn't want that for my children. I didn't want that. When you just look at thousands of research on families, kids from divorced homes score higher on all kinds of problems and behavior problems. But kids from strong, healthy marriages, strong, healthy families where the marriage is strong, they do well on all social indicators. They're less likely to go to alcohol, drugs, less likely to have emotional problems, less likely to have school problems, et cetera, et cetera. Why would I want to hurt my children? And let's be honest, I didn't want to hurt myself. By living for me rather than us, I hurt myself. All humans need to feel that they have value, that they matter, that we're loved, and that we have a purpose in this world. I'm going to say that again. All humans have a need to feel valued, that we matter, that we are loved. Excuse me again. That we are loved, and that we have a purpose. It was our parents' responsibility to impart that into us as children. And they do that by how they treat you, whether they meet your needs, et cetera, et cetera. Yet, it's also true in our marriage. In all of our marriages, we need to know that our partners value us, that we matter to them, that we're loved and lovable to them, and that our marriage isn't just existing, that our marriage has a purpose, that there's something that we could be doing with our marriage for others. Maybe it's just raising kids. Maybe that your marriage serves a church or volunteers somewhere. Because when it comes to what I call the four questions that all people need answer in life, do I have value? Do I matter? Am I loved? And do I have a purpose? Your marriage can answer those four things in a positive way. Even if you never got it in childhood, I can still impart that into my wife. She can impart that into me in our marriage, day by day, month by month, year after year, just by how we treat each other and how we play out our relationship and solve conflict and communicate so that we don't damage each other and our usness. All right. So then, how you treat each other is crucial as to whether your marriage will make it or not. How you treat each other. All right. Now, some people like to argue, and you'll hear this sometimes, even in the faith community, that love is not a feeling. It is not an emotion. It's an action. And that you can act your way into a new way of feeling. Now, I personally think that is a pretty ridiculous statement, and I can prove it. If someone is beating you on a regular basis, I don't care how much you act loving towards them, you're probably not going to feel a lot of love towards them. You're going to feel a lot of fear and anger and hurt. Because ultimately, love is an emotion. And to understand that love is emotion, you have to understand the logic of emotions. You go, what is the logic of emotions? It's simple. The logic of emotions is to understand this one simple truth about the brain. The brain is wired to avoid pain and pursue pleasure. That the brain will do whatever it takes to avoid pain and pursue pleasure. And no matter what we do, your brain does not want to be in pain. It wants to be in pleasure. And it will do whatever it needs to do to make sure it's in pleasure. Now, let me give you a sense of what I mean. All humans are needy. And all our needs must be met and will be met. And when our needs are met, we feel loved and valued. When our needs are not met, we don't feel loved and valued. And a lot of things that people do are it's ways of trying to feel loved. But what you're doing isn't going to get you feeling loved. All right. We'll use the idea of appetite first. All right. Humans have a need for appetite. It's a biological need. Must be met, will be met. No matter what. It has to be met. If it's not met, long term, you're going to die. All right. Think about needs are when needs aren't met, something dies. So let's go back to the idea of the need for appetite. If a person hasn't eaten in 5 days, need for appetite, and I give them a bunch of hamburgers, would the hamburgers satisfy an unmet need for appetite? And the obvious answer is yes, it will. Kind of a 1,000-foot view, it works kind of like this. The moment a person takes the first bite into a hamburger, the brain goes, oh, you're eating something. And the brain releases a neurochemical called dopamine. Say that with me, dopamine. Dopamine is a neurochemical that when it is released is a mood shift into pleasure. It's like your brain, you take the first bite and your brain goes, oh, you're eating something. Releases a dopamine, you have mood shift and pleasure. You finish all the hamburgers, you're no longer hungry. You moved out of pain into pleasure. It's also true that if I was to give you, rather than hamburgers, if I gave you much of rat poison to satisfy the unmet need for appetite, the question is, would rat poison satisfy an unmet need for appetite? And the answer is yes, it would. Same thing. Take the first bite into rat poison, brain goes, oh, you're eating something. The brain releases dopamine no matter what. So you have mood shift into pleasure. Eat all the rat poison, you're no longer hungry. Even rat poison will satisfy an unmet need for appetite. The problem, though, is with the rat poison, because though the rat poison will satisfy an unmet need for appetite, the rat poison is also going to create more pain. What does pain do? It pursues pleasure. Pain pursues pleasure. Avoids pain, pursues pleasure. That's what the brain does. So now you have more pain from the rat poison. What does your brain do? Pain pursues pleasure. So what do? You go back to your source of pleasure and eat more rat poison. Why would you do that? Simple. Bad love is better than no love. Negative attention is still better than no attention. You see, when people are doing certain things to save their marriage, it's the idea of pain and pleasure. The problem is what they don't know is they're using rat poison ways to try and create something pleasurable. And rat poison, it may feel good in a moment when you're doing it, but the end result is more pain. And so you have to make sure you're solving the problems in the relationship so you're not using rat poison ways. Example, one of my top 10 relational needs, we call them CARES. That's an acronym for those 10 needs. One of mine is affection. All right. When I get affection, man, I'm telling you, I get dopamine like crazy. If I don't get it, I feel really hurt. All right. And so it's one of my top 3 needs. And it's one of my top 3 relational needs. And I would try and get affection, by the way, just by reaching over, holding her hand. In the early days, I'd hold her hand in church. She'd jerk her hand away from me. And the moment she jerked her hand away from me, pull her hand back, I copped an attitude. The instant message to my brain, you don't love me. I don't matter to you. See, if I mattered, you'd want to hold my hand too. But you don't want to hold my hand. So I'd sit there and sulk. We'd leave church and I'd sulk in the afternoon. What was all that sulking for? Because I was so mature back in those days and pretty broken and wounded, the sulking was my way of punishing her for not meeting my need for attention so that it would make her feel guilty. So she would give me attention enough to give me affection. And by the way, eventually she would come back. She'd fine, I'll hold your hand. I don't want to hold your hand now. Why? Because down in my gut, I knew I took it from her. You see, the relational needs can only be given to you. But a lot of times we go and we do things to take them or punish our partner for not meeting our needs, thinking that if we do this, that somehow they'll want to meet the need and do it, and we'll feel the pleasure. And the reality is, you don't feel the pleasure. You feel more pain. They're more angry at you. They're feeling manipulated. They're feeling controlled. All right, whatever it is, it will never really work. So you have to save your marriage in a way that creates pleasure, not pain. And I get that people do crazy stuff and attempt to save their marriage. They're just doing what their brain knows to do. It's like you're operating out of fear. You're operating out of fear. Had a lady refer to me quite a long time ago. She was going to a church-based counseling center that does this form of counseling that's very anti-psychology, all Bible. And I'm not here to diss it. I'm just not a part of that group. And they've been in counseling with this lady counselor for a year. This woman that had come to see me had been in counseling for a year at this church-based counseling center. Her husband had been cheating on her for over a year. And even though they've been counseling for a year, he's never quit the adultery. And finally, after about a year of counseling, she confronts the counselor. And the counselor says to her, well, actually, the reason that he is committing adultery, it's your fault. You've made your husband an idol. And because you made him an idol, this is God's consequences on you. That motivated her to talk to another person who said, hey, go see Dr. Rick Marks. So she comes to see me. Gave her 2 hours. And about 45 minutes into our session, she starts crying heavy. I mean, heavy. And while she's crying, her hands are in her face is in her hands, and she's kind of leaning over. And in the tears and the pain, she says, it's my fault. It's my fault. It's my fault. And I was like, help, ma'am, how is this your fault? She said, it's my fault. I said, I got that. How is it your fault? And she said to me, my counselor told me, it's because I made my husband an idol. And this is a consequence for that. Boy, was I ever angry. And so I had to take a deep breath. And she's sobbing. For almost a year, this lady's been taking the blame for his actions. And I didn't want to be disrespectful about her counselor. So I said, well, you know, ma'am, there is another prism by which you can see this through. She said, what other ways to see this? I said, well, I don't think you made your husband an idol. What I think is you love your husband and your marriage and your family so much, you're fighting to save it. But what you're doing to fight to save it won't work because it's out of fear. So everything you're doing is out of fear, so you look like you're kind of crazy. And this other counselor sees that and says it's idol worship. Ma'am, I think God's proud of you, personally. I said, if he's here in this room in the flesh, he'd pick you up and hug you and tell you how proud he is that you're fighting for your marriage. I said, it's not idol worship. What you don't know is your husband's an adulterer. He doesn't want you. He's heavy into porn. He has a sexual addiction. This has nothing to do with you. It has to do with who you're married to. This isn't about you. You know, a statement, the truth sets you free. You could see the light bulb go off on her. She said, you mean I've been believing a lie for almost a year? Well, yes, ma'am, you have. Well, she quit going to that counseling center that day, started seeing me. The marriage didn't make it because he's an adulterer and a sex addict. He didn't want to change. And so the marriage didn't make it. But you want to know something? She began to live in what is true and not listen to lies. And by the end, she was living her life in a healthy way, recognizing that it takes two to save a marriage, one to kill it. It takes two to make an us, one to kill it. She didn't have the ability to save that relationship because the other person didn't want to save it. So that was her. All of that stuff that she was doing was pain and pleasure. Her brain thinks that if I do these things, then it'll make it better. Problem is what she's doing won't work. But she doesn't know that she doesn't know that. So what are some things that you can do and not do? All right. So let's start with do not do these things. Here are some do nots. Thou shalt not, do not. All right. Number one. It's going to sound, I don't know what the word is. Here, you ready for it? Don't, do not give up on the marriage too soon. Too soon. A lot of people get frustrated or hurt, and they in their attempt, in their frustration, in their attempt to save it, they can't save it on their time frame and their way. They just give up and throw it away rather quickly. You know, saving a marriage is going to take time. It's going to take counseling, understanding. You got to heal. You got to restore trust, which takes time. You got to heal the heart, which takes time. Don't give up on the marriage too soon. Don't throw in the towel. I always say it this way. If there is in you, to any degree, on any level, still a love for your partner, still a desire, then hang in there if you both have it. All right? If you're 1% in, just give 100% of your 1%. All right? It's not until one person is 100% out that it's over. So don't throw in the towel too soon, all right? Because when you throw in the towel too soon, you may be throwing away the very thing that you want. It's just impatience or a sense of hopelessness has made you feel like it can't be saved, so you just throw it away. Number 2, do not beg, plead, whine, or manipulate a person to stay. Do not beg, plead, whine, or manipulate a person to stay. Number 1, makes you look weak. And you are when you're doing that. And when you beg or whine or manipulate someone, it shows not just your weakness, it shows your inability to communicate, your inability to be respectful of the other person. See, people who respect other people, they don't beg or plead or whine. They don't manipulate others. To manipulate someone is disrespectful. There's no goodwill in it. And so you don't beg, whine, manipulate. When you want to save a marriage, you've got to show that you're healthy and mature. Your partner may not be, but you can learn to be patient and kind to them as they grow and heal. But don't beg, whine, and manipulate them to stay. If that person says they want to go, you know, the old adage is love fights for things, but love also knows when to let something go. All right? In other words, I love you enough to let you go because I recognize I can't make you stay and I can't make you love me. It's not what I want. And so don't beg, whine, manipulate, plead, grovel. Have your self-respect. Speak your truth. Do it in a loving way. But remember, 2 to make it us, 1 to kill it. Number 3, do not do, and this is very important, don't threaten them to stay. Don't threaten them to stay. I have worked over 30 years with people who threaten suicide to manipulate a person to stay. They've threatened, if you do this, I'm going to take everything. You're not going to have the kids. You don't have no money. You threaten everything. You threaten harm. You threaten, I'll tell everybody about your adultery and porn use. You threaten someone to stay? You understand when you threaten someone to stay and they give in to the threat, you've not created a love in them. You create more resentment towards you. To threaten someone, it's a power play. It is about control. There is zero love in it. Now, you may think you're being loving. I get pain pursues pleasure. But if that person chooses to stay because of the threat, you haven't created love in them for you. You've created more disdain in them for you. Now you've created more reason for them to want to leave. They're just afraid to leave because of the threat. Until at some point, they don't care about the threat anymore. And that's usually what I see a lot of times. Go ahead. I don't care. Well, then you just lost your power. The threats don't work anymore until you up the threat. Don't threaten a person to stay. We all have free will. Make your choices. But to threaten someone to stay is a real power play on your part. And the 4th of the do not do things that I want to indicate to you is, and this is very important as well, don't don't go bring in family members or friends or an aunt or an uncle or your mom or your dad or their mom or their dad or the children. Don't bring other people into this to convince them to stay. Once you start enlarging the circle here to convince them to stay, it's another power play. Now, because you're afraid and you don't have the ability to convince them to stay, you start going getting other people to do it for you. Again, it's just going to build resentment towards you because they're like, why in the world would you go tell my mom? Why would you tell my dad? Why did you bring the kids to this? Why did you tell? More resentment towards you. I get what you're trying to do, but it will not work. It comes across as control. So when you do these do nots, they're not going to work at all. They're just not. So we talked about 4 things you don't do. Let's talk about some things you can do. Do these things, all right? Number 1, stay committed. Stay committed until you know for sure that they are done and they are out. You know the old that old saying, "It ain't over till the fat lady sings." All right. When you know for a fact 100% that it is done, there's nothing you can do to save it. You've done all that you can do, and they have made it very clear. I am not ever going to want to be married to you again. I am done. It is over. When a person is 100% sure it's over for them, back away, tell them make your decision. Make your decision. All right, but stay committed until you know you're at that place. All right. Now, secondly, one of the things that you can start doing, which is what I did in my early years of my marriage, I went and started to develop myself emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, physically. I began to develop myself, particularly emotionally and relationally. I began to read books on personal development. I began to challenge my insecurities and fears inside. I began to heal from the things from my past that I'd never healed from before, like my father wound and my anger, resentment towards my stepmother that were buried into my unconscious mind. I went and confronted those things and dealt with those things. All right. I developed myself spiritually so that I could live beyond myself for far greater things. I developed my mind and learned the things that I need to learn. I learned the tools for communicating. I learned the skills and tools for problem solving and emotional regulation. I learned what does it really mean to bond and connect to someone. Relate well, by the way, is the essence of all of that. All right, our relate well curve actually is all of that journey, what I've learned. And so one thing you can do is begin to develop yourself. What you can change is you. You know, a lot of people quote the Serenity Prayer, but they don't really think through the power of the Serenity Prayer. The Serenity Prayer, for those that don't know, is God, grant me the serenity, which means peace, to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right? Now, the power of the Serenity Prayer is really about control. All healthy people understand we all have limited control. There are things in life you can't control and things in life you can control. But the things we really can't control are a lot, and things we can't control are little. All right? And wisdom lets you know which is which. What I can control is what I do, how I come across, how I treat Luella, etc. I can't control what she does, but I can control what I do. And I begin to develop myself so I can be a healthy, mature person and no longer react to things, but respond by making good choices. Number 3 of what to do. Respect their boundaries, folks. Respect their boundaries. If your marriage is in crisis and you really need some help, further help this area, I recommend the book by Michelle Weiner Davis called Divorce Busting, or go to divorcebusting.com. It's one of the largest visited relationship websites on the internet. It's how to save a marriage by yourself. But one thing Michelle says is, it seems counterintuitive to our brains that we're supposed to keep fighting. But your partner says, leave me alone. Don't talk to me. Don't come to my house if you're separated, let's say. Leave me alone. Well, that seems counterintuitive. Well, if I leave you alone, we can't save it. But what Michelle points out is when they set those kinds of boundaries, respect them. Don't call them. Don't visit them. Because whenever you keep pursuing and disrespect their boundaries, you're only convincing them that they're right about you. You can't even respect not calling me. Why would I want to stay married? And so respect their boundaries. To disrespect their boundaries gives them further justification to want to leave. Number 4 of the do's, live your life from what we call the 4 protectors of an us. The 4 protectors in us are the 4 ways of being that I developed myself to be over time, because that's how I wanted to be is in all aspects of my life. The 4 protectors are goodwill, respect, humility, and empathy. In other words, become the kind of person, develop yourself to be a person of goodwill, a person who's respectful, a person who has empathy and it shows care. And none of that can happen without humility. Learn to live a humble, powerful life, because to live a life of humility creates a very powerful person. People who live in pride are actually weak. That's all lower brain. You see, it's animal brain. Live your life from the 4 protectors, all right, of a relationship, so that in all things, you're treating your partner with goodwill. You're being respectful. You're being caring. And you're being humble. And by the way, when you move to pride, you won't be respectful. You won't be caring. And you won't operate with goodwill. You'll operate with ill will. It's just the way it's going to work. Now, number 5 things to do. Number 5, develop within yourself patience and kindness. Now, we know that there's, that old thing about love. Love is patient, love is kind. And it goes on to state 13 more traits. But those other 13 are actually variations of 2, patience and kindness. In other words, develop yourself that in all aspects of your life, become a person of patience and be a person who's kind. Now, in my early days, many years ago, I found myself to be pretty impatient. And what I realized is, to the degree that I'm impatient, I'm not loving, but to the degree that I'm patient, I am loving, because love is patient. To the degree that I'm unkind, I'm not loving. To the degree that I'm kind, I'm loving, because love is kind. And so what I began to do in my own development way back when, 25 years ago now, I began to look at the world this way. Every single day, I get opportunities to practice, that's the key word, practice patience and kindness. And so whenever I found myself in a Walmart checkout line, 20 lines available, 20 lines, and they only have one open, and you're in a long line and you're standing there really impatient, I began to realize that was an opportunity for me to practice patience. Someone cuts you off on traffic and you start to speed up and stare at them, that's unkind. There was an opportunity for me to practice kindness. And the more that I practiced patience and the more that I practiced kindness in all its forms, the more I became patient, the more I became kind, and the more those things didn't bother me anymore. Why? Why would I want to let those things rob me of my joy? Why would I want to let you and your issues rob me of my peace? I'm just not going to do that. I can care how it is for you because I have empathy, but I'm not going to let you rob those things of me. Why? Because I became a person who's patient and kind. And it's a very powerful way to live when you live a life of patience and kindness. You're just not letting things, mess with your brain, mess with your heart. You're in control of you. And the last thing you can do to save your marriage is become a person who is worthy of trust. Become trustworthy. And if you've broken trust, however you have done it, it is essential that you become a person of trust. One thing I've learned about trust in my journey of studying trust and researching it is this: trustworthy people are never bothered when their trustworthiness is questioned. Why would they be bothered by that? Well, because they're trustworthy. And because trustworthy people are trustworthy, if you question their trustworthiness, they're not bothered by that. They would go, well, why would I send you that? What did I do to send you that message? Hey, they're trustworthy. They're trustworthy. And they're not bothered by it. It's when you question someone's trustworthiness and they're bothered by it, they get defensive. That's the person that probably lacks trust. But you become a person that's trustworthy. That's the greater way of being. You start to live your life as a trustworthy person in all aspects of your life. All right. So we're wrapping up here. We've talked about things you can do, things you don't do. We talked about the reasons why we do it. Pain pursues pleasure, right? It's how the brain works. The problem is all the crazy stuff that you're doing or should not be doing is an attempt to get something positive. But what you don't know is what you're doing isn't going to get what you want. It's going to get more what you don't want. So we talked about those 4 things you don't do, all right? Don't give up the marriage too soon. Don't beg, whine, plead, manipulate. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't threaten a person to stay. And don't bring in other people like family, friends to convince a person to stay. Excuse me. Done pretty good with that coughing for a little bit there, haven't I? Now, don't let those things destroy a relationship. And now we talked about the things that you want to do. Stay committed until you know for a fact the person's done. Develop yourself emotionally, spiritually, physically, and intellectually. Respect your partner's boundaries. Live your life from the 4 protectors. And remember, the 4 protectors are goodwill, respect, humility, empathy. It's the core foundation of our Relate Well program. Develop patience and kindness as a way of being for your life. And lastly, do become a trustworthy person. Well, there you go. Things you can do and things you don't need to do. This is Dr. Rick with Relate Well. Have a great evening. Take care, y'all.